I brought two stories to share with you this morning. The first one comes from Ireland. Now, a number of years ago, I was living in Ireland. And one night I was staying in an old farmhouse on the backside of a very lonely mountain. And in the middle of the night, I heard the wind howling outside my window. And it sounded just like a woman wailing in the night. Well, traditionally, the Irish believed that banshees were female spirits. And if you heard a banshee wailing in the night, that meant that someone was going to take their very last breath in the house. And that is what my first story is about. There was once a woman named Grace Doherty. Now, Grace fell asleep listening to the wind almost every night of her life. You see, Grace and her 4 children lived in a stone cottage between the rolling Atlantic on one side and a lonely Irish bog on the other. Oh, yes, Grace was used to dark and stormy weather. But one winter's night, just after she tucked her youngest into his cradle, Grace heard a new sound rising above the wind, a high-pitched, keening sound, almost human, but not quite. Oh, Grace recognized that sound all too well. It was the same wailing that she'd heard the night her poor old mother passed away. Oh, poor Grace. Every hair on her arm stood on end as she listened. But she was a brave woman. She had to be living in that lonely place, and she simply could not accept what the banshee's cry signified. It was one thing to lose her poor old mother, but quite another to lose one of her own children or to die herself. For that is what a banshee's cry signifies. It foretells a death. So Grace screwed up her courage, wrapped herself in her cloak, and went out into the darkness. Well, the terrible wailing led her right to the edge of the rocky headland above the sea, and there at the very brink of the steep cliff was something or someone shrouded all in white. Oh, Grace got as close as she dared and then shouted over the wind, "Why are you here, you cursed creature? What message do you have for my house?" Poor Grace's heart nearly stopped beating when the banshee replied, "The one that sleeps in the cradle this night will take its last breath ere morning dawns." "No," Grace cried, "no, it can't be." But the banshee had already vanished into the mist. Oh, poor Grace, tears streamed down her face as she made her way back to the cottage. But just as she was about to cross the threshold, she had an idea. She went instead to the byre, to the little barn where the family's few animals were asleep. She took down an old hen, one that was nearing the end of its laying days, and she brought it into the cottage. Then she took her son from his cradle and she settled the old hen in her son's place. And for the rest of that night, Grace slept with her son wrapped tight in her arms. Well, sure enough, in the morning when she woke, Grace's baby boy was very much alive, yowling for his breakfast. And the poor old hen? was very dead. Grace said a grateful prayer, and the family enjoyed a hearty chicken stew for their supper. Well, everything was fine after that. The waves crashed, the wind howled, but it was only the wind. But then, one night in the early spring, Grace heard that dreadful wailing rise up again. Poor woman was every bit as frightened as she'd been the first time. But there was nothing for it. She wrapped herself in her cloak and she went out to confront the banshee. Well, it was the same thing all over again. Grace got as close as she dared, shouted her question, and got the same terrible answer. The one that sleeps in the cradle this night will take its last breath ere morning dawns. But Grace wasn't an Egypt. She knew precisely what to do. She went and she got a hen from the byre, put it in her son's cradle, and in the morning, all 4 of her children were alive and well, and only the poor hen was dead. Well, this went on for month after month. The banshee would return at the waning of the moon with the same terrible curse, and Grace would place another animal in her son's cradle. But the family wasn't wealthy, and it wasn't long before Grace ran out of small animals to sacrifice. She ran through all the hens and all the geese and all the sheep. And let me tell you, it is not an easy thing to squeeze a sheep into a cradle and make it stay. But Grace loved her children. She loved them with a fierce love, and so she did what she had to do. But finally, near the end of November, only one animal remained. With a heavy heart, Grace led the family donkey from the byre to the door of the cottage. But it was as if that donkey could sense its fate. It absolutely refused to be led through the door. Grace pushed, Grace pulled, but that donkey held its ground. It kicked at the doorway with such force and brayed so loud that soon all 4 of Grace's children were wide awake. Well, you can imagine the looks on those poor bairns' faces as their mother explained why she was trying to lead a donkey through the door in the middle of the night. Well, Grace's oldest child was just 9 years old. The poor girl's eyes were as wide as saucers as her mother described the banshee and repeated its dreadful curse. But, Ma, the girl said, why haven't you put the cradle into the fire? Grace stared at her daughter for a long moment and then let go of the poor donkey's rope. Ugh, but you're a clever wee lass, aren't you? The Doherty family cradle ceased to exist after that night. They tore it apart, put every last piece into the flames. And then Grace and her oldest children took turns with the poker to make sure that every last splinter was reduced to ash. Oh, how the banshee raged when she next returned. But there was nothing she could do. The cradle was gone. The curse was broken. Well, Grace's children, they did not sleep quite as soundly on dark and stormy nights after that, as you can imagine. But the banshee did not return to trouble them again. So I have one more story, and this story is about a girl named Bridey. And the thing that you need to know about Bridey is that she was absolutely fearless. She wasn't afraid of anyone or anything. If someone dared her to climb to the top of the tallest tree in her neighborhood, she would be up that tree so fast, and then she would laugh at the boys who were too scared to come up after her. If a stray dog growled at her in the street, she would growl right back. If the mayor of her village, the mayor himself, scolded her, she would laugh in his face. "Oh, Bridey, Bridey," her grandmother would say, "a little fear is a good thing sometimes." But Bridey just laughed at her too. Now, Bridey's village was at the edge of a forest. And that's where Bridey and her friends spent all their spare time. Whenever they weren't in school or doing chores, they were in the forest playing hide and seek or building forts or just getting away from the grown-ups. But there was one part of that forest where no one ever went. The trees were old and bent and grew too close together, and there were rumors that an old witch lived there. Now, was Bridey afraid of that part of the forest? Of course not. Was she afraid of old witches? Not a chance. So one day when Bridey was feeling a little bored, she dared some of her friends to come explore that part of the forest with her. But no one else was brave enough. "Fine," said Bridey, "I'll go by myself." And that is exactly what she did. Well, it got very dark very quickly under those trees, but that didn't slow Bridey down. Deeper and deeper she went until at last she came to a little cottage. There was a fire burning outside and an old woman stirring a great big steaming cauldron, a great big pot. "Hello, old woman," said Bridey. "Hello yourself," said the old woman. "What's that you've got in your pot?" said Bridey. "My supper," said the old woman. "Would you like a taste?" Now, Bridey's grandmother had warned her never to accept food from strangers, and depending on the circumstances, that is generally good advice. But Bridey had worked up quite an appetite pushing her way through those trees. And besides, whatever was cooking in that pot smelled surprisingly good. "Sure," said Bridey, "give it a try." So the old woman skimmed a spoonful of broth from the pot and held it up to Bridey's lips. It was good. In fact, it was one of the most delicious things Bridey had ever tasted. "What is this?" "My special recipe," said the old woman. "Would you like some more?" "Yeah," said Bridey. "Splendid. That will be 1 gold coin." I'm a kid," said Bridey. "I don't carry gold coins." "No problem," said the old woman. "I take silver too." I don't have any money," said Bridey. "Oh," said the old woman. "Now, that is a problem. I can't just give my soup away. But I notice that you have a rather nice shadow." Bridey looked over her shoulder, and sure enough, there was her shadow, looking rather impressive in the firelight. "Tell you what," said the old woman, "I'll make you a trade, an ounce of your shadow for a bowl of my soup." Now, I don't know if that makes sense to you, but it definitely did not make sense to Bridey. How do you trade an ounce of your shadow? But she was getting hungrier by the second, and besides, what use is a shadow anyway? Well, no sooner had she agreed than the old woman reached behind her and began to wind a bit of Bridey's shadow around her hand as if she were gathering up a spider's web. Bridey felt a slight tug at her heel, and it was done. And her shadow did look a little paler. Well, the old woman gave Bridey the promised bowl of soup, and it was even tastier than before. Bridey gobbled it up, but she was still hungry when it was gone. "Another bowl, another ounce," said the old woman. "Deal," said Bridey. Well, they repeated this transaction several times, and each time Bridey's shadow got a little paler and a little paler and a little paler until finally, Bridey's hunger was satisfied and her shadow was completely gone. Bridey did not quite feel like herself as she headed for home that afternoon. She felt a little lightheaded, a little dizzy. And that forest, it seemed a little darker than she remembered. In fact, there were a few moments that Bridey almost thought that she was lost. But she managed to make it back to her village, back to her own cottage. She told her grandmother that she was not hungry, and she went straight to bed. Well, Bridey went to bed that night, but she did not go to sleep. There were shadows on her bedroom wall, not her shadow was gone, but other shadows, strange, twisty shadows that she had never noticed before. And that dark space beneath her bed, she never noticed just how dark it actually was. You see, poor Bridey didn't even have her own shadow for company that night. And let me tell you, that is a very lonely thing. But the next morning was bright and sunny, and Bridey was feeling a little bit better when she got out of bed. At least until her grandmother saw her sitting in the sunlight. "Bridey, where's your shadow?" Bridey told her everything about the old woman and the tasty soup and the strange bargain they'd made. "Oh, Bridey," said her grandmother, "you need your shadow. Everyone needs a shadow. Without it, you'll waste away. You'll have to go back and get it." "But I don't have any money to buy it back," said Bridey. "Oh, here, take these," said her grandmother, and she placed some copper pennies in Bridey's hand. "You tell that old woman this is all you have, and you're not leaving until she gives you back your shadow." Well, Bridey accepted the copper pennies, but she didn't move. "I don't think I can do that, Grandma." "Why not? You're not afraid, are you?" "Of course not," said Bridey. But that wasn't true. For the first time in her entire life, Bridey was afraid. Very. "Oh, my dear," said her grandmother, "a little fear is a good thing sometimes. As long as you have a little courage, too, you'll be fine." "But I don't think I have any courage left," said Bridey. I think it all went with my shadow." Oh, dear, of course you do, said her grandmother. When you're feeling scared, you just take a deep breath and then reach deep down. You'll find some courage. Well, Bridey really wasn't so sure about that, but her grandmother was watching. So she forced herself to start off for the forest. Well, she hadn't gotten very far when the trees seemed to close in above her head, and then she heard a branch crack. Was it a wolf? Was it a bear? Was it something worse? Poor Bridey's knees were knocking, but she forced herself to take a deep breath, and then she started off again. Deeper and deeper she went, over tangled roots that tried to trip her, past crooked branches that tried to catch her, until finally she reached the little cottage. But there was no sign of the old woman. "Hello?" said Bridey. No one answered. "Hello?" Still nothing. Poor Bridey's heart was pounding, but she knew what she had to do. She took a deep breath, and then another, and knocked on the door. "Yes," said the old woman as the door creaked open. Oh, she was more frightening looking than Bridey remembered. Her eyes were too dark, her mouth was too big, her hair was sticking up in every direction. "I've come to get my shadow back," said Bridey. "It's my shadow now," said the old woman. "I traded for it fair and square." I can buy it back," said Bridey. "Copper pennies," said the old woman. "Oh, please," said Bridey. "It's all I have, and I really do need my shadow back." "Fine," said the old woman. "I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll make you a wager. If you can choose your shadow from all the shadows in my collection, I'll let you take it home. But if you choose the wrong shadow, I'll keep your copper pennies and you'll go home with nothing." Well, what could Bridey do but agree? While she waited, the old woman went inside, and when she came back, she was carrying a great big bulging sack. Now, from the outside, that sack looked just like any other sack, but when she held it open so Bridey could look inside, it was black, blacker than night, blacker than sleep, blacker than the deepest, darkest cave. Bridey did not want to put her hand into that darkness. Oh, she breathed. She breathed until she was nearly hyperventilating, and then quickly, before the last flicker of courage went out, she thrust her hand into the sack. And do you know what she felt? Nothing. The sack was empty. Or at least that's how it seemed at first. But then Bridey felt a faint tickle, as if something as light and airy as a cloud had brushed against her fingertips. And then Bridey felt another one, and another one, and another one. The sack was full of shadows, big ones, small ones, short ones, tall ones, all kinds of shadows. But how was Bridey ever going to tell them apart? How was she going to choose her own shadow? And then she felt it, way at the bottom of the sack. A girl-sized shadow. The other shadows, they were all crowding around her hand as if they were trying to get her attention. But this shadow was curled up like a reluctant cat. "Oh," said Bridey. "Oh, I abandoned you, didn't I? My poor, brave shadow. I traded you for a bowl of soup. I am so sorry." Well, as Bridey spoke these words, she felt the shadow begin to uncurl. It brushed against her fingers and then stretched out the entire length of her arm. "I found it," said Bridey. "I found my shadow." "Are you absolutely sure?" said the old woman. "You only get one chance." "I am absolutely sure," said Bridey. "Oh, fine," said the old woman. "Take it and be off with you." Well, very, very carefully, as if Bridey were gathering up a spider's web, she drew her shadow from the sack. The moment it was free, she felt a tingle run up and down her spine, and when she looked over her shoulder, there was her shadow, as if it had never been gone. Oh, Bridey felt just like herself when she set off for home, brave and strong and complete. And Bridey is still brave to this day, but she isn't completely fearless. As her grandmother is fond of saying, a little fear is a good thing sometimes, as long as you have a little courage too.